Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to our Aware webinar this afternoon. And we'll just take a moment before we get started to allow people to join. So just taking a moment and allowing yourself to settle. And welcome to those joining. You're all very welcome again. My name is Dr. Susan Brannick. I'll introduce my guests in just a moment, but just to introduce you to our webinar today. So our topic is on depression. It's more than just feeling sad. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with our webinars, we run these on the second Wednesday of every month. So do have a look at our website for more information. You can find that on aware.ie. So there's a whole range of information about our education and our support services for people who are living with depression, bipolar disorder, as well as those who are who support them. So without further ado, I might move on to introducing my guests today. So I'm very happy to be joined by Luke Madden, lived experience expert, and Stephen McBride, counselling psychologist, group analyst, and director of services at Aware. Welcome, Stephen and Luke.
Thank you, Susan. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, very excited to be here.
Thanks for joining. So, and I guess as I was saying, our topic today is depression, and it's more than feeling sad. So hoping to have a good discussion as we go through today. So for anyone who's joining, please do feel free to add questions into the chat box. We'll get to them at the end. If you're left with anything outstanding or anything that's kind of landed with you in a way that you weren't expecting, really encouraging you to link in with what's helpful or supportive for you, maybe a mental health professional, your own self-care practices, or your GP as well. Okay, so maybe we'll get started maybe with you, Stephen, in terms of definitions, if that's okay. So maybe a big question to start with, but what do we mean by depression? Maybe we're thinking about kind of current understandings and where are we at in 2024 about how we make sense of this.
Yes, it's an interesting place to start. And thank you, Susan. As I said, it's lovely to be here to talk about depression. And of course, you know, I totally concur with the idea that depression is more than just feeling sad, you know, and on a continuum as a mood-related condition. You know, in 2024, the definitions of depression are very broad and wide-ranging. But I suppose as a mood-related condition, you know, what we currently understand it to be is, you know, an impact on a person's mood, you know. So sadness and distress, of course, are fundamental aspects of depression. That experience of melancholy, sense of hopelessness, perhaps despair, you know, and these are kind of the experiences as I describe the lived experience from the work that we do at Aware, you know, and from stories I hear from our service users and people who link in with us. You know, and in relation to depression being a mood-related condition, it's such a debilitating and impactful condition on people who are living with it and experiencing it, as well as for their loved ones and supporters. You know, and also, as I've described, you know, depression being on a continuum, very often depression is seen as being, you know, perhaps a mild form of depression, and then other times people maybe are discussed with them that it's a moderate form of depression, and then there's also severe and enduring depression, you know. But for a person, you know, with depression, you know, experiencing, you know, the signs and symptoms of it for 2 or 3 weeks to do with how they feel and their energy levels, sleep disturbance, you know, thoughts about themselves becoming diminished and depleted. There's a whole wide range of signs and symptoms which are greatly described by our festival acronym, you know, to describe depression, which is a great tool for us at Aware. But also, I suppose it's important, you know, to think about some of the ongoing conversation nowadays about depression with, you know, perhaps intermittent psychotic features, where a person may be experiencing, you know, perhaps hallucinations or auditory or visual hallucinations, where a person loses grip with reality. And that would be an extreme experience, I dare say, of a person who's experiencing a depressive episode. And also, you know, which has been part of the conversation in the mental health sphere, but is developing legs even further now. And I very much welcome that in terms of the conversation about depression, is around postnatal depression. and the impact of, depression on primary caregivers, whether that's, predominantly a mother who is generally speaking in the caregiver role, but also for fathers in that regard too, or for parents, So this idea of postnatal depression is another understanding and, thought that's going on and conversation around depression in the round that's currently, gaining traction, So I hope I've given a wide-ranging, insofar as that was possible in the time available, about what depression is and the definitions of it and what it might look like for people experiencing it. And just a last line on it, in terms of depression, sometimes in terms of presenting with depression, there might also be, quite a lot of irritability, frustration that life hasn't worked out for a person, experiencing depression, sense of regret, not achieving life's goals, and how a mood-related condition like depression can develop from that, and the sense of rage and anger about oneself and one's ability to thrive in the world or get on in the world, can be also a common experience and description of living with depression.
Excuse me, there's a lot in that, isn't there, as you say? So and it maybe speaks to the point that depression might look quite different for different people, and maybe depending where they're at in their lives. And we'll maybe come back to the festival, because I think that's helpful maybe in terms of people recognizing some of the symptoms. And as you say, maybe there's not only could someone be on a continuum of mild, moderate to severe in terms of those categories, but there's also quite different types of depression that people, so maybe after having a baby, as you say, or and then maybe depression with psychotic features, so that loss of connection with kind of reality can be tricky. So there's quite a wide range of experiences there, isn't there? And I guess that comes with that maybe a wide range of understandings. Yeah. Luke, I wonder if it's worth you, maybe if you might be able to share some of your experiences with us.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of what Stephen has said there really resonated with me. You kind of brought me back to the pieces of processing with some of those bits and pieces that you talked about there. And I'm sure we'll kind of go into it a little bit in a while. But firstly, I just want to say, like, I have a lived experience with depression, and it's not a linear journey. There's never a start point and an end point. Well, there certainly hasn't been for me. So I'm here to share my story, but I just want to kind of caveat by saying, people that, that are suffering from depression that are tuning in today, family members that perhaps have somebody that's suffering from depression, I do see you and I hear you, and I do acknowledge you, for showing up today and being part of this, because it's a difficult, thing to endure. I want to take a look at my own journey and where that started. It was really interesting, because in the past, I would have never perceived myself to be, I could be negatively affected by mental health, by depression. And what depression, I often was told what it looked like to somebody was an extreme overt sadness, but never anything else. So for me, I was always this charismatic, chatty, person that I'd often be told by my friends to shut up talking to others, because I was just always involved in conversation. So for me, if I was to think of what society says depression actually is, I would have said, that's not possible for me. Absolutely not. I will never feel like that. I am a happy person. And I often think now, what is happy? What is happiness essentially? But just to talk about my experience, it was about coming up to 4 years now. So Christmas Eve, essentially. So, the time where us as family members, as friends, everything is to be happy. Society is meant to be happy at that time. And I remember being at my grandmother's house, and I was like, we were all there, all my family together, and, we're having a great time. And during that day, I had said to my mom, I'm feeling a little bit strange. I just felt that I was starting to withdraw a small bit. I wasn't able to hold as much of a conversation as I was in the past. And I was very much like, I'm just not feeling, that elated mood. I feel a little bit low. And I remember her saying to me during the walk, this will pass, it's probably just you've finished work, Christmas has happened, energy levels are low, enjoy Christmas and I'm sure you'll be okay. So I left that happen and all was okay. And I just remember being in my grandmother's house that evening being like, something is just not right. And we left and the conversations were great and you're with all your nearest and dearest. I remember walking my sister out to the car, and as I was, crossing the road, I genuinely just stopped. And I just felt, and I described it to my therapist before, it felt like my brain had snapped in half. I genuinely just broke and I was startled. And what was probably 2 or 3 seconds was probably, well, it was about 2 or 3 seconds. It felt like, hours. And everything just went. I had a disconnect. I was overwhelmed. I, felt that I couldn't have conversations. Energy just depleted. Everything that I never felt would happen. And things that I didn't know were related to depression, were happening to me. And I remember just being like, I need to get my sister home. It was an icy evening. And then that's all that matters. I remember I got her home and I was like, sitting in the car for about 20 minutes afterwards, being like, what is going on with me? Like I've never felt this before. Like I'm completely disconnected. So I got home and I remember speaking to my mom and she was like, just go to bed. It's Christmas Eve. You'll be okay tomorrow. And that's when, I woke up Christmas morning, my nephew downstairs having a great time. And I'm sitting on the floor, just looking at him with his presence with no feeling, no emotion, no desire to engage with anybody. And that's just not what my Christmases have been. That's not what, family time has been to me in the past. And it kind of progressively got worse. So over the Christmas period, I met friends and I remember just being in the pub. We'd have like kind of a regular meetup every St. Stephen's Day. And I remember just staring at the wall. There was nothing from me. I wouldn't say I was great company, to be honest, but there was nothing coming from me, and it was around that time that I kind of said, Mom, like this is not right. I finally go back to a conversation. Often when I think, what was the point where it was like, this is it, was me and my mom would always talk about, flowers and plants and human organisms and how they're wonderful and amazing. And that connect, I would have. But I remember looking at her dead in the eye that day and just saying, I don't care whether every single plant and flower out your back garden in the house dies. And that really signified the level of disconnect, from a humanistic perspective. I was just null and void. It felt like that I'd fallen into this vortex. I often describe it as a hamster wheel, just kind of going around. It's like repeat, 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 repeat. So that was really, I suppose, when things started to get bad for myself. And from that then, it was like I'd fallen into quicksand and I was just being, dragged further and further down. And I had kind of questioned, I wasn't overly familiar with mental health. And again, like I said, I wasn't really familiar with the symptoms and that depression, I suppose, places on people. So I was like, what's happening? Am I going to be stuck like this for the rest of my life? Is anything ever going to change? And that was when we got in touch with clinical professionals and psychotherapists. And I did a bit of work, well, quite a few sessions with the psychotherapist. And I started to challenge, my mindset, my thought processes, the negative perception I had of myself. And I suppose it's been work in progress since then. But yeah, that's where it all began. I suppose that's the landscape for my journey this far.
Yeah, thank you, Luke, and thank you for that description. There's a lot in there, isn't there? And it's, as you say, it kind of in the rear view mirror currently, but I guess there's a lot. It sounds like a lot of difficult experiences actually, and as you say, in real, there's kind of a few themes I sort of wanted to pick out there in terms of, I suppose that's comes back to our maybe kind of unique but shared experiences of depression, potentially that disconnect. You describe it really beautifully, actually, just that kind of disconnection from maybe yourself and also from those conversations or the way of connecting with your mom that would have brought a lot of joy or that kind of interest. It's just a complete, as you say, a complete cut off of that, which I think can be the case for many people. I wonder what that was like in a sense. It sounds like it felt very clear that there was something very wrong. And that was quite obvious for you at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really, really difficult, to be honest, because you go through life, and I was, I'd enter my early 30s, and for myself, you believe that you know yourself at that
Mm,
time. You've had all of these experiences, you have your family and friends. For me, even when I look back, like, I was achieving what society said I needed to achieve. I was
mm,
working in the corporate world, I was successful, I was earning money, I had great friends, I had a great family. Um, so when you're, I suppose, met with this moment, it's like everything that you believe in yourself is now changed. So I was really battling with, is this the new me? Is this the person that now I have become and that I'm going to exist as for the rest of my time? And I found that really, really difficult, because then I started to question, would my friends want to be friends with me? What if I have to be admitted to a psychiatric ward? If this gets worse and worse and worse, would people come to visit me? Then I was thinking of my nephew, and would he be allowed? And all of these negative, perceptions of yourself start to just really, like, lean in very, very heavy. So that was when the overwhelm started to happen. So there was the disconnect, and a lack of emotion. I would have, when I think back, I would have loved to feel sadness. And I
mm,
know that sounds strange, and that's often what is described. Depression is sadness. For me, it wasn't. For me, it was the disconnect, where I was like, please just give me some form of emotion or connect. And
mm,
it was the overwhelm. It was the lethargic, I suppose, being of myself. It was the rumination and the negative perceptions that I have of myself. So all of that combined it was a really, really difficult period.
mm,
And I found it very difficult to talk about how, I suppose, painful it was, because I didn't really think people would want to hear. I just felt that I was going to be a burden on people. And when that's your mindset, to try to offload that, or to talk to somebody about it is really, really difficult. So there were many different dialogues going on in my mind.
mm.
But yeah, it was a really difficult place to be, when who you felt that you knew as yourself had become something else. Like, who am I anymore? You know?
Yeah, I think
That's great.
Luke describes depression so well there, and the different aspects of it, and it's great to hear you describe it. It's so vividly, and to paint the picture of it, in terms of that rumination and thinking becoming, cyclical and, not helpful, and that sense of overthinking too, and sense of stuckness. You mentioned the hamster on a wheel and something being numbed. So there's various different words that maybe the audience here this afternoon will connect with, in terms of their own experience, perhaps, or their loved one's experience. But just thought that you described it beautifully around the mood and the impact of the mood, and that will help inform people, I think, here. Just that idea of and avoiding and withdrawing and being out on with your friends, and not wanting to be there, and that sense of disconnect. Just those aspects of depression, I just thought was very helpful to hear, I think, in this conversation.
Yeah,
Thanks, Steve.
absolutely. And I guess, as you say, like, it's sort of that challenging your sense of self, and that can be quite a common theme in depression. And as you're kind of reiterating there, Stephen, sort of maybe getting stuck in some of those thoughts and believing them fully. And I guess that kind of looking at it from the depression, kind of fully believing what your mind is telling you in those moments. And Stephen, I don't know if you wanted to say something a little bit about I guess, about that kind of idea of the numbness that people might experience, and I suppose that maybe also maybe some people might have an experience of it being quite gradual. So I guess for Luke, it was kind of, as you say, literally this kind of split, but other people might actually realize maybe 6 months in, hold on a minute, like this, I'm actually not feeling great at all, or maybe not get to that realization. But maybe you
Yeah,
want to.
yeah, and there's something in that, I think, about, if not self-awareness, but kind of a penny dropping, saying there's something not quite right. Because I sense that for us all, that we try to keep going maybe, or maybe at times we have a propensity to pretend something isn't as bad as it is, and I'll get through this. I know something might be up a little bit, but I'll be better in a week's time. And then lo and behold, it's 2 or 3 months later and it has developed into something more serious. And that's why it's so important, insofar as that's possible, to ask for help and to seek support as quickly as possible, in terms of if you notice something being off internally, or with how you're thinking about yourself, or how you're thinking about relationships, or how you're feeling about yourself as a kind of unique person in the world that can contribute so well to relationships, whether that's in the workplace or in a social environment or with your family and friends. So I really support that idea, Susan, that depression can be developmental, and is, in terms of it, becoming more challenging or difficult, if it develops month on month and sometimes year on year. And then I suppose thinking about it too, the other factors that are involved in it, I suppose, is, the societal piece of it, or the familial piece of it, or the disconnect in relationships. And I suppose, thinking about depression and, the causes of it, and the impact of it, I suppose, on society, but the causes of it being societal or structural too, and we might have some time to think about that. Yeah.
They're wide questions, aren't they? And I guess it kind of moves from the individual to the culture and the society. And it's, as we say, maybe people's experiences can be quite different, maybe developing difficulties over time, and there's something, as you say, Stephen, about kind of connecting in for help. I suppose the guidance is if, and maybe actually it's worth kind of bringing in the festival now. Do you want to talk a bit about that, and how someone might, I guess, kind of in a very concrete way, when someone might start to recognize or think, okay, maybe this is the point I should be, talking to someone like Luke, maybe talking to your mom, or maybe going to the GP again, maybe a GP that you have a good relationship with, or well. So it's, I guess, I think it's sort of choosing who you speak to as well quite matters, doesn't it? So that you'll know your relationships better than anyone else, but it's being quite judicious maybe, or intentional, and saying, okay, well, who might be someone, whether that's someone in your network already, or a professional. But do you want to kind of go through them, Stephen, in terms of what might help people really kind of get a grasp on whether it's themselves or someone they're caring about? What might be the kind of point to say, well, maybe some help would be good here?
Yeah, I think what really resonates with us as an organization, and also in terms of our training of our volunteers who provide our support services, and thinking internally, that we use the festival acronym, as a great educating tool to describe the experience as well as the signs and symptoms of depression. So if after 2 weeks, that if you felt as though that you weren't feeling, the F in festival is for feelings. So there is the sadness and distress and the sense of powerlessness, hopelessness, melancholy, but also irritability, So if you were feeling, for 2 weeks that you were experiencing, quite an amount of those type of feelings, associated, that you're kind of, that might indicate that you're experiencing a mood related condition. And if your energy levels, the E in the festival acronym is around energy levels, if they are significantly depleted, and tasks that you were able to complete relatively easily are no longer possible to you, if you're experiencing sleep disturbance, either over or under sleeping, if your thoughts about yourself have become more unhelpful or unhealthy, and also if your thinking has slowed down, with depression, thinking slows down, and the ability to process, things cognitively or from a thoughtful point of view becomes diminished. And the I in the festival acronym is, your interest in hobbies, friends, and food. If that becomes diminished and depleted, as Luke has described, in terms of his experience and lived experience of depression. And the V is the value. If your value in yourself becomes as a unique contributor to the world, as I said, and your relationships, if you feel as though that you're of no value to yourself or the world around yourself, or depleted value. And then also aches and pains, which are more specific than the aches and pains that we can all experience. And that's back to the time frame. If you're feeling as though that your body is carrying some of those signs and symptoms of depression. And then the L in the festival acronym speaks to a loss of interest in life and relationships and loved ones around you, and maybe professional relationships. So that's the festival acronym, you know. And if you're feeling 4 or 5 of those kind of signs and descriptors of depression for more than 2 weeks, we really recommend to people to reach out for support. And I'd concur with that, Susan, you know, the idea that who you choose to reach out to, you know, is important, you know, whether it's a loved one. And just to let the audience know that we're here for people to reach out to, you know, in our support groups and on our support line and in our education programs, you know, our life skills program, you know, we have a relatives and friends program, you know, we have a variety of education programs and support services that people can reach out to, you know, to receive that support and understanding and some validation in terms of the maybe confused feelings and the sense of uncertainty. And it's quite a frightening and debilitating experience to, you know, to experience depression, you know, and that idea, you know, of not knowing what to do, not knowing who to turn to, you know, can be very debilitating and frightening, you know. So I hope I've given a good descriptor of what it might look like in terms of that festival acronym, you know, and the thoughts and feelings from a broad perspective, which may describe what depression looks like. And again, back to the idea, it is so much more than just feeling sad.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. That's great.
And I just say something like that as well, Susan, just in relation to that acronym. I just remember the first time during my training with Aware, you know, coming across that acronym and reflecting on my experience and my journey that I had kind of gone on, and thinking, if I had been aware of that acronym, you know, back 4 years ago, I would have checked in with myself a lot sooner than meeting that moment in the middle of the road where I felt like my brain had just, you know, broken in half, because there were telltale signs, you know. So it wasn't just that, I suppose, that momentous evening. And there were like, I suppose, negative self-talk, a negative perception of myself, and a sense of isolation from myself as well. My mood was lower, you know, over those few months coming up to that period. So if I had been aware of the acronym and being more familiar with what depression really looks like to many different people, because we always say depression is not linear and it wears many, many different masks, thousands and thousands of masks, you know, for every individual person. But if I was aware of that acronym, I perhaps would have checked in with myself long before, you know, I met that time. And I think it would have really benefited me, because perhaps things may not have been as difficult as they were, and I may not have, I suppose, gone as deep as I did. But again, I wasn't aware of it, and I managed, and, you know, I'm here today to tell my story. So, you know, there definitely can be positive stories. But yeah, just what Stephen was saying, it really resonates with me.
Yeah, no, thank you, Luke. That's really helpful, actually, because, and I guess that's the purpose of our webinar today, and I suppose the purpose of Aware in many respects is to help support that education and awareness. As you say, I really like the description, actually. It wears many masks, so it might look very different for different people. Going back to what you had said earlier, Stephen, at the beginning, maybe that kind of persistent irritability and kind of agitation and dissatisfaction, along with other stuff that might go under the radar of maybe being noticed. So that's maybe a very concrete kind of tool for people to use, maybe to support that self-reflection, as you say, Luke, kind of, because I guess people need tools, don't they, to kind of look inward in a sense. So it's there's a task in that. So I'd really encourage anyone who's kind of interested in that maybe to have a look on our website as well, where you can see it laid out if you look up festival. And I guess then, Luke, maybe kind of staying with you in terms of what did help. So you kind of took that leap into speaking to your man first, and then you mentioned kind of more clinical professionals as you went on. So I suppose what you did, and also what other people did that you found helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is really, I suppose, speaking to somebody that you feel you know, safe and supported with, and is going to hold a space for you in order to, you know, to talk. And I'm fully aware that not everybody has that person in their life, or that group within their life. So again, I'll just say to people, services like Aware I did give Aware a call one day because I was like, I just don't know what's going on. I feel really overwhelmed. And I remember being so distraught on the phone. And the lady on the other end really held a space for me to talk. But one thing that really worked was I remember going for a run with one of my best friends, Dara. And I remember kind of going over it in my mind, being like, do I bring this to his attention? Do I let him know, you know, how I'm feeling and the turmoil that I'm going through? And I remember just going, it's time now to speak about it. And getting the words and verbalizing the words and having, you know, a person that's very, very close to me just absorb that and accept that and give me space. Like, it just felt like that I had a weight completely lifted. You know, it was like, oh my goodness. So what I'm thinking people are going to think about me is not actually the case. And he, you know, although we were running and we were a little bit tired, he held the space for me to talk and didn't ask too many questions, but just gave me the space. And then that, I always say, that question that you just say, is there anything that you need from me? You know, and then that's it. It just allows the person. So for me, I was able to divulge anything that I needed to, and he didn't need to say anything. And again, really reconnecting with my closest friends and my family. I am very fortunate to have an amazing group of family and friends who really supported me, I suppose, and continue to support me because, you know, I say that, you know, I have a lived experience of depression, but I may also, you know, live an experience of depression going forward. It's not infinite, you know, well, it is infinite. It's not finite, you know, so it's very much surrounding yourself with people that you feel, you know, are positive, I suppose, people within your life. I then started to do things like I used to love running and hiking. So I really was like, I need to start doing these things again. I need to get out. I need to feel the elements on my skin. I need to feel what it's like to move my body. I need my body to, and my mind and my soul essentially to know that there's more to life than staying indoors and not wanting to go outside. So really reclaiming the hobbies that I like thoroughly enjoyed in the past. Cold water swimming. Although it's a difficult thing to step into the water, especially in Ireland. It was something that I find really like revolutionized my entire journey. It was something that I felt has really benefited me. And then I suppose intertwining that with, you see a lot of those pop-up saunas, you know, seeing sauna things. So really started to take that on board. So really reclaiming a lot of the hobbies that I really enjoyed before, you know, that I allowed just fall by the wayside, you know, when I felt that I was overwhelmed or when I was in that period of real darkness and disconnect. I let all of those like hobbies just kind of fall by the wayside. Yeah, so they were really, I suppose, the things that worked for me.
Yeah.
I often, sorry, one.
I was going to say, no, I think that's really helpful actually, and I suppose what's going to work for someone might be totally different. Some people might think, oh God, I'd never do cold water swimming. That's a nightmare, you know. But so I guess it's something about reclaiming, as you said, the things that you used to enjoy. And maybe this is a question for both of you in a sense, but I suppose thinking back to our continuum of depression, there might be kind of people listening or thinking, okay, yeah, maybe I could go out and do X or Y or do that in the house, but there might be other people listening or thinking about someone they know that is very far off of how to get back to even simple things that might have brought joy or pleasure. So I wonder, Stephen, do you want to say something to that about how someone might take that first step back into something that feels very distant from where they're currently at?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I think there might be a pre-step to the first step. And the pre-step to the first step might be acknowledging and recognizing that depression is, you know, and having compassion or empathy internally, if possible, which I suppose isn't necessarily possible when depression is in the midst, you know, but to really try and think to oneself that what I'm going through and what I'm experiencing is very, very difficult and very, very emotionally painful and taxing for me. And in a strange way, by that internal validation and perhaps or external validation from a loved one, if you have strong connections or emotionally intimate relationship with someone in your life. And hopefully so, but obviously that's a risk factor or a vulnerability factor for depression, to be isolated or not have that emotional connectedness. So I think that pre-step kind of involves an acknowledgement, or saying or admitting to oneself that actually what I'm going through is very challenging for me right now. And what is the next right thing I can do? And sometimes for people with severe or enduring depression, that might mean just getting out of the bed and fixing themselves a meal, and, and I was also thinking in our discussion about another, aspect of depression around seasonal affective disorder and the impact of light and the lack of light in the winter time on people's mood, and in olden times, and the stigma may be associated to that, using colloquial language around, oh, X or Y took to the bed, So that idea, maybe if depression is really manifesting itself or being experienced really strongly, that it might be just about doing the next right thing, about, moving your body or fixing yourself a meal, for example, or eating or trying to nourish yourself through healthy food. And then for other people, as we said, the unique experience of it, maybe if it was, a moderate form of depression, or maybe, it is about, and I love the way Luke described it, as reclaiming your hobbies, so it's one little step at a time, even in the fog and the confusion and the upset and the distress of depression. So trying, it mightn't always work, we're human beings, but trying to do the next right thing, and whatever that step is, to, get on that journey of recovery.
Thank you, Stephen. And I guess, Luke, what would you say to someone who is maybe finding that difficult, as maybe Stephen's saying, to kind of take that step in the fog of the distress and maybe the hopelessness?
Yeah, I love the idea of a pre-step to step one, Stephen. I think it's amazing. And really I suppose what I was thinking of, and what was really landing with me at that point, was to be kind to yourself, and to go easy on yourself. There can be a real, I suppose, want and expectation that we place in ourselves, that when we have a low mood, or we're feeling, overwhelmed or disconnected or depressed, that we just want to be fixed immediately. And I say the word fixed, and I want to use inverted commas, because nobody is broken. But it's really to be very mindful that this is, a journey, and getting out of bed in the morning and, showing up to a friend or to a family member, or just doing something, that you feel worthwhile doing, is a real step in the right direction. And I know I touched on things like cold water swimming and running, but for somebody that may be, a 5-minute walk, from their house to the shop and back. Again, they're outside, they may feel the benefits from something like that. So it is small and perhaps baby steps sometimes. And this is a journey, and it's an ongoing journey. And unfortunately, there's no magic wand, that anybody can ever just, wave to say, we're going to take away the psychological distress or that psychological pain at this moment. It's, for me, I feel it's about trusting the process and keeping a belief in yourself. I suppose, try to remain as positive with yourself as possible. And I know that can be very difficult. But just checking in. How am I feeling in my body today? How am I feeling in my mind today? Do I feel like perhaps going for a longer walk tomorrow? So perhaps 10 minutes tomorrow. Maybe I'll reach out to that friend that I haven't spoken about, but I've thought about speaking to, over the past 2 or 3 months. So it's just about, again, like I always just say, just bringing it back to small things. You don't have to be revolutionary and make drastic changes all in one day. And just be kind to yourself, because you can often become caught up in that negative self-talk and the negative perception of yourself. And that's a difficult place to be. Yeah.
Could I jump in there and add another thing? Because I agree wholeheartedly with Luke when you say, that there's no magic wand. And yet, and of course, you know, I would say this as a psychologist and as a psychotherapist, but I think that it's very important for a person experiencing depression and a mood-related condition to try and, you know, authorize or to take the power to talk about it, or share the load, or share the burden, you know. And I suppose we're repeating that message again from earlier on about reaching out for support. But the idea that we can go it alone, or cope alone, or recover alone, I don't know about that. So my sense of it is to seek to speak about what's going on in your mind, and to talk about what's going on in your mind and what you're feeling. You mightn't necessarily have the language around feeling words, or maybe you do. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get the language right. There is no right or wrong, but really taking something up to talk about what's going on in your mind, and maybe some of the stress or despair or frustration or whatever is going on in your mind, to try and speak to that. And of course, for a lot of people in our society, you know, and for a lot of people who reach out to Aware for support, they don't necessarily have a person or people or that kind of social connection that you've referred to, Luke, with your best friend and your family to reach out to, you know, and that compounds or further develops the experience of depression, you know, for people, you know, and that's why we're here, really, isn't it, as an organization, to provide that to support to people in that regard. So really, I suppose to sum up what I'm saying is to try and share the burden and not go it alone, to talk about what's going on in your mind.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. And I guess a really hopeful message, as you say, to share that and to be able to speak. I suppose it allows a different understanding, doesn't it? Maybe, and you've kind of alluded to that, Luke, as well, of sort of, excuse me, not getting stuck in your own head and having that soul perspective, which, as you say, also when self-criticism or shame, guilt comes into that, it can be a very unpleasant place, as on a very straightforward level, no, regardless of everything else with it, but it can be very painful, maybe. So it's about kind of, where possible, opening that up. Yeah.
And I just quickly say on that as well, and I suppose I remember going to see a clinical professional, so I'd gone to see a psychotherapist, and I remember going there expecting that, you know, she was going to just say, now you can go and you're going to be really, really happy now going forward. And I quickly realized that that wasn't the case. But showing up to her session on a weekly basis and being able to, like Stephen said, you know, share that burden, share that load, you know, have somebody that's going to hold a space for me from a real objective perspective was like fundamental in the healing process that I've gone on. It really, really, I started to be able to pinpoint what emotions I was feeling, you know, why I was having, you know, catastrophic thoughts, and really working with myself internally. So having that person to go to was really, really, I suppose, a real like lifesaver, essentially, for me, I'd say.
Yeah. You know, that's really helpful. And I guess just thinking about the questions that are coming in, there's one or two then about, yes, that sort of idea about different kind of therapy modalities, or kind of what might help if someone isn't taking medication. Excuse me. There's an evidence base for cognitive behavioral therapy and depression. Also different types of therapy. It's probably about the relationship though, isn't it? So it's finding a person that you have a good fit with. And that's going to, as you say, I really like that, Luke, actually, that kind of allowing or holding the space for you to be able to reflect and maybe to be able to get that different perspective. So that's maybe kind of it. And I hope that kind of answers that question, in a sense that different approaches will work for different people, I guess, in terms of the type of therapy and I guess the type of person as well who's offering it. There's a question in here, which maybe, Stephen, you might like to think a bit about, the difference between depression and loss and grief. It's a big one, but I guess as a bit of a kind of an overview, I suppose, for someone, because it's also really important, I think, in how you might tease it apart, because I think maybe loss is a fundamental part of depression as well, and can be, and grief, whether that's for a role or a person or a transition.
Yeah. In one sense, they can be jumbled up, I suppose, and also to separate them apart in terms of, you know, trying to normalize the experience of grief. You know, if, you know, a significant other has died, or if a pet has died, or, a person, in one's life, or an animal in one's life that is gone permanently, of course, there's going to be grief, and you're going to be bereft, and that experience of loss and emotional pain, which actually may, because of the feelings associated with it, may actually be felt similarly in terms of a person experiencing depression. So also to say, in a continuum, that prolonged grief, and there is, literature out there specific to prolonged grief, it does, hold a lot of the signs and experiences of depression. So prolonged grief, can lead to an experience of depression. Whereas I suppose if I was to disentangle them, if that's the right word, that depression as a mood related condition in and of itself is can be seen as standalone. But if you're grieving the loss of a significant other, in your life, of course, your mood is going to be impacted. You're certainly going to feel sad, and that a sense of loss. So there's an overlap with them, of course, as experiences in the world, but also there can be a separation too, if I've described that as accurately as I can.
Yeah, that's great.
And there's no way of avoiding that. We are all going to experience loss and death in our lives. We're all mortal. We're all going to die ourselves. So I know that it's existential in one sense, but and the risk, I suppose, is that in prolonged grief, a person may develop a condition of depression or a mental health challenge around depression.
Yeah, I guess there's a fundamental piece in here, isn't there? There's the messiness of the human condition, that it's difficult to kind of make abstract kind of categorizations that we try, but I suppose that for people's experiences will be quite rich, won't they, and diverse, and incorporate quite a lot. And I suppose based on that, we'll have different needs maybe, and maybe thinking just about a question that's come in there about what about psychiatry and medication. Certainly all interventions will have a role, maybe thinking back on our continuum of depression from mild, moderate to severe. There'll be different kind of responses depending on the needs anyone has on that continuum. So there's a role for everything, and certainly medication in combination with psychotherapy is an evidence-based intervention for people with what's classed as moderate to severe depression. So I guess really important aspects to think everyone's recovery journey is going to look different. Certainly there's a role for the multidisciplinary team and medication for those who may need it.
Absolutely.
There's another interesting question here, which maybe, I don't know, Luke or Stephen, you might want to speak to. If you have recurrent episodes of depression, there's a tendency to feel that your friends or family have put up with a lot of negativity for you. Any thoughts or advice on that?
Yeah, I suppose I can come in here, because that's certainly something that I've experienced, over the past 4 years. Like I said, it hasn't been a linear journey. And I've reached this point, and everything is perfect now. So I've had those thought processes where I've really, really struggled to want to bring, a particular feeling or a particular emotion to some of my friends or to my family, because I just thought that that they'd taken enough from me, that they had absorbed enough, that I had placed my fair share of burdens onto them. But what I found was that there are particular people within my friends groups and particular family members that I know that I can reach out to, and that I can share, how I'm feeling on any given day. It doesn't mean that everybody within my friends group or my family I can share with, or I would all of the time. But there's specific, one or two people that I would feel very, very comfortable with opening up the conversation. But again, it's about understanding the relationship that you have with that person, knowing that they are there and they are going to meet you where you need to be met. So I think just really, tuning into the relationships that you have. And it doesn't have to be, to like a lot of people all of the time. It can just be to that one friend that is going to be there as a support. But I have experienced that, and the questioning, do they even want to be my friend anymore if this is what I'm bringing to our friendship? And what I found is that in actual fact, they do, and that this is a part of what I'm living with at the moment, and this is how I'm feeling. And if I wasn't being my authentic self in that friendship, then, you know, they may not want to be friends with me because I wasn't being authentic and being, and I suppose living my truth. So that's kind of what I've done with those feelings in the past.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Do you want to add anything to that, Stephen?
Yeah, I suppose it can, the experience of it, you know, and just tuning into what Luke was saying, you know, I think that's been very helpful how you've described it, Luke, you know, and connecting in with the idea of being too much, or that it's important to then, you know, for the relatives and friends and loved ones and supporters to find their own space to speak about the impact of depression on their lives. And, you know, we do have open for registration now, relatives and friends programs for the loved ones and supporters to speak about their own journey, because that is impactful too, you know. So and I think trying to keep the lines of communication open is important, you know, insofar as is possible, and to speak about what's going on in your mind, because we can very often censor ourselves for fear of upsetting or distressing the other person. So how can we kind of navigate that space of speaking openly insofar as is possible? But I'd really encourage, you know, and connecting into that comment, Susan, you know, people to look on our website, aware.ie, and we have some spaces available in the Relatives and Friends program, which are starting next week, you know, so that's Aware program.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so aware.ie, I think you just cut out there when you were saying it. So there's certainly a few questions coming in about how you might support someone who might resonate with some of those signs from festival, but may have mixed feelings about seeking help. So I guess that's maybe thinking about that group. And I don't know if you want to add anything, Stephen, into that sort of question. How do you help someone who you think or you're worried about might be feeling depressed, but maybe isn't so open to seeking help at that time?
That's a very difficult position to be in, you know, because, you know, it's almost kind of mirrors or kind of, you know, goes alongside the experience of powerlessness, maybe that the person with depression is experiencing, that the loved one or significant other, you know, feels that powerlessness, that they don't feel listened to, or the communication is blocked, you know. So it's a very difficult experience to be a supporter of a loved one. Yet how can that next right step, or seeking to take the step of keeping the communication open, even when it's met with maybe the scenario being minimized or denied or some defensiveness? So I think, you know, my best kind of, if not advice, but thinking on it is you know, to try and keep talking. You know, you can't make the penny drop. And yet you can still kind of hold your own truth in it and speak, you know. And again, just to, you know, flag our, you know, there's plenty of learning strategies, skills and tools that are spoken about and taught in our Relatives and Friends education program for that very one thing.
Yeah, I guess it's something that a lot of people across the country may well be facing at any point in their lives. It's certainly something that comes up a lot. Excuse me. So there's a lot of questions in, and my apologies if we don't get to your question. We're fast running out of time, unfortunately. And I guess maybe, yeah, thinking as we come to a close today, maybe starting with you, Luke, and then coming to you, Stephen. I guess maybe what from all of our conversation today, or your experiences kind of more generally, what you think might be the most important thing you would want someone to take away from our conversation today?
What I would like, I suppose what I would want people to take away is that you are experiencing, you know, depression at the moment, but this is, I suppose, not your end journey. You know, it's a process that you're working with. Be mindful and consider yourself, you know, on a day-to-day basis. And perhaps taking a look at, you know, reclaiming a hobby. So something that you are interested in, whether it's just going for a walk or whether it's, going for that swim or whether it's meeting up and going for a coffee with that friend. But just it's about being mindful that you are a very, 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 very important person in a lot of people's lives, and often when you're feeling low or overwhelmed, you can sometimes, and we've touched on feeling like that you're a burden, and that you're not. I might like to say, I know I started this off with a caveat to say that I do see you, I hear you, and I acknowledge you. I know that, aware are there as a service if you don't have that direct connection. Yeah, there are many different services for you to avail of. And please don't suffer in silence. Look to engage with people that you can share some of those, difficult times with.
That's great. Thank you, Luke. Really, really powerful. Thank you. And Stephen, from your perspective?
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, and so just connecting in with the theme of the day, just to think about on Aware Mental Health Week, and World Mental Health Day happening tomorrow, that, to really chime with the message that depression is much more than just feeling sad, and to promote and advocate that empowering message, to try and speak to people who are in this audience who are experiencing depression, or a loved one's experiencing depression, or maybe if whatever kind of way, if you're a volunteer on this webinar, thinking about the support that you can give to people and empowering them by listening to them, whether it's in your personal life, your professional life, or wherever it is, the idea that by being a voice and being there to listen to people, is so important to try and give that space to people who are experiencing and impacted by depression, a space to feel heard, validated, and listened to, and we're here to do that, at Aware. And if I may, just to support people coming on to our education programs, we have some spaces available. They're all starting next week. We have evidence-based programs in terms of, as you mentioned earlier, Susan, cognitive behavioral principles to support people through the experience of depression, so there are some spaces available on our relatives and friends, our life skills, and also our bipolar disorder program for people in the audience to register for and to engage in, because that will help you take the next right step, or do the next right thing by yourself in your journey through your experience of depression.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Stephen. Luke, thank you so much. A lot of comments and thanks in the chat for your, as someone described it, which I would really agree with, very eloquent description of depression, which I'm sure has been very, very helpful. Excuse me. Sorry, for many people listening, and thank you for being so generous in sharing those experiences. It really matters, and it really matters to hear people speak out in terms of what's happened and to them and what's been helpful. And I guess so thank you very much for offering that today.
No problem, thanks. And it really does matter. And I suppose that's why I'm here, to share that story, because if it resonates with one person, I feel my job is done.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And Stephen, thanks so much too for offering your expertise and your time this afternoon. Really appreciated. Hopefully it's been a very helpful discussion for those watching. Apologies again, as I said, if I didn't get to your question. Can't get to all of them, I'm afraid, but do speak to a GP or a mental health professional, or have a look at our website, aware.ie, if there's anything left outstanding. Certainly the festival acronym is up there as well and that's available. So thank you all very much for joining. Moving on to the webinar for next month now. So that's our November webinar. And that's on the 13th of November. We're going to be talking about menopause and mental health. So hopefully we'll see many of you there. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.